So this morning we're here in the lobby of the hotel. Our goal here is to get a great lobby/entryway shot, and I think I found a composition that suits us pretty well. This is a pretty difficult shot to get, as with most hotels there's a lot of people coming in and out, there's a lot of foot traffic. So the issue that we're going to run into is we want to make this hotel look alive, but we don't want to have a huge line of people, we don't want to have random people coming in and out everywhere. What we want to do is have specific control over the models that we use, what they're wearing, what they're doing, etc. So it's going to be very tricky. As with other hotel shots, you can't really shut down a working hotel. You can't tell people coming in after a 6-hour flight from LA that they have to wait 20 minutes while we get the shots. So we've got to be very quick, we have to have minimal impact on the operations of the hotel, and we still have to have control over the entire scene. That being said, let's talk a little bit about my composition. So a shot like this, I don't want it to be completely empty. I want to have some kind of life, some kind of activity in the shot, otherwise it starts to feel a little bit apocalyptic when there's a completely barren and empty atrium/check-in reception area of the hotel. So before I settled on this final composition, I walked around and took some handheld photos to kind of think about what I wanted to do. As you can see from most of these shots, some of them you can't see the ocean, some of them have a bit funky decor going on, some of them have giant desks right in the foreground, or some of them feel very, very empty and stark. I like this composition because, again, it's a one-point perspective that's got great leading lines. We see the reception desk, we see the character of the interior of the hotel, and at the very end of the shot, in the background, we get the nice blue horizon line of the ocean. So I think this shot from this location does a great job of summing up the mood and the feel of what you get as soon as you walk into this hotel. So I've settled on using a 24mm lens with a 1.4 extender. This is a bit longer than I normally shoot for a hotel, but what I want to do is I want to bring that ocean view, I want to make it feel closer to the camera than it actually is. So I'm going to shoot a little bit longer rather than shooting super wide at 17 or 24. Like I said, I've gone to about 35mm with that extender on, which is going to kind of make that scene feel a bit tighter, bring that ocean view a little bit closer, going to make everything feel a bit larger than life. This is going to be similar to most other hotel staging in that we want to make sure everything's nice and perfect and lined up and clean. However, we do have, again, paying guests coming in. They have every right in the world to sit down. You've got to really kind of take this piece by piece rather than staging the entire scene at once. I've opted to just shoot this one piece at a time. So I'm going to shoot the background, then I'm going to shoot the midground, then I'm going to shoot the foreground, and that will minimize the complexity of having people walk in and out constantly. This shot was made much more complicated by the fact that it was imperative that I caught that ocean view. Usually when I'm shooting a hotel lobby, I'll shoot it at like midnight or 2 or 3 in the morning when there's almost no activity in the hotel, and it's much easier to pull this off. But because I thought it was so important that we get that ocean view, we had to shoot it during the day. I've opted to do this during the morning hours, which there's not so much activity going on. Most people that are going to check out have already checked out, and most people that are going to check in are going to do so around 2 or 3 in the afternoon. So this is, again, a mid-morning shot. It's about 11 o'clock right now, and I would highly suggest that you plan around a slower time of day to do this shot. So in the background, mostly what I want to do is clean the scene up and make it read a little bit better. There were a few plants that looked a little bit saggy and dead that I just got rid of and replaced them with a new plant. I made sure that all of the concierge desks and check-in areas were as clean as possible. I removed any distracting elements such as books, magazines, stuff like that, and again, just wanted it to be clean and simple and not busy because this is a relatively busy scene on its own. I have the ocean, I've got the interior of the hotel with all these beams and arches, and I know I'm going to have models in the check-in desk right here. So by simplifying everything as much as I possibly can, it helps to clean it up and make the photograph read a lot better. Now before I start shooting, I'm going to stage the whole scene. Keep in mind that people are going to come in, they are going to stand at the concierge desk, they're going to bump things, it's not going to be perfect. But when you stage the whole thing, it'll make it much easier to do quick adjustments, so if someone does sit down and then they get up, you can just knock that chair back in. So being that this is an active working hotel, it's going to affect how we light this scene. I'm not going to be able to take an hour to light paint everything. I don't want to be holding up guests, taking the concierge away from their desks, etc. I want to be fast. So the first thing I need to do is make a game plan that allows me to effectively light this scene in a quick way. What I'm going to do is bounce flash in each individual area and then composite that all together. And this is going to let me do it very quickly on site. It might take a bit of work in post, but it's going to be much faster to light it like that rather than light paint everything and take an hour lighting each zone. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to expose for the windows to remove some of that bloom that comes in from those overexposed highlighted areas. So I'm going to increase my shutter speed to get it at least in the ballpark, and I'm going to zoom in on my camera on my iPad and make sure that those window frames are nice and crisp, especially around the view. Remember guys, if you go over 1/160th or 1/200th of a second, you're going to start to run into sync problems. Your shutter is going to cast a black shadow on your sensor from your flash, and you don't want to have that, so keep in mind you can also use your aperture to block some of that light and remove the bloom. If you need to kill more ambient, you can, again, make your aperture a little bit smaller, go up to f11, f13, and that'll have the same effect. So now let's grab a flash and start lighting this room up piece by piece. So what I'm going to use to light this is the ProPhoto D1. It's got 1,000 watts compared to the 500 of the B1, which is going to give me a stop of extra light. And I'm going to want that extra power because it's a very large room and I'm trying to light a bit of extra area. And as you can see from my first attempt using the D1, the light does not match the interior ambient light, so I'm going to have to add a gel to make those colors consistent. I've chosen a 1/4 CTO just to warm this light up just a little bit to pull some of that blue out and make everything more consistent. So we had a window of about 2 or 3 minutes where nobody walked through the frame. We were able to light up this corner of the room pretty quickly. All I'm doing is bouncing this light into the ceiling. I'm not going to get too fancy with the light. I want a nice, even, soft coverage because, like I said, I don't have 20 minutes to spend fiddling with modifiers and light painting to make this shot. Because that area of the scene is so far away, I don't need to be extremely perfect with the light. I'm actually out of the frame, bouncing it into the scene from the side, which is going to give a little bit of direction. Again, I don't want to flatten that out, but the added benefit is that I'm hidden and it'll be very easy to composite in that one section later. Because we've exposed for the window and knocked down that interior ambient light so much, it's going to be pretty easy to determine the correct flash power. I want as much light as possible, and instantly I can see that the interior looks very well lit in relation to the exterior. Now that we have our scene lit, it's time to add a little bit of life to this scene. As I mentioned, I wanted to get some models, have them checking in, and make this feel like it was a working hotel, not this sterile, empty photograph. So what I did was I worked with my contact at the hotel to grab a few people who were working down the hallway. Now we didn't have complete control over this, and it was more of an educational thing. So these are not wardrobed, these are just regular people that we grabbed who we thought would look the part. We also grabbed some of our luggage to stage the scene a bit and make it more realistic. We also had a great hotel employee who volunteered to stand in behind the check-in desk and hand over some keys, again, to make it more realistic and make it look like we had just put the camera here to catch a perfect moment. Now, if this were a higher-end $30,000 or $35,000 job, you'd probably have a designated wardrobe stylist. They would take care of all the details of clothing, of luggage, of styling. But for this, I just wanted to show you the concept, so we didn't pay too much attention to it. You'd also probably have to sit down with your client and hire some models with a specific look for the feel you're going for. So before we waste the time of our models, because again, they are employees of the hotel, they work here, I don't want to take them from their desk for an hour, I'm going to grab some stand-ins, just going to be our crew, and they're going to kind of be a practice run for when the real models get here. So I'll set the lighting, the staging, everything, so that when the real models do show up, I'm only going to have them for 2 or 3 minutes, and it's going to be minimal impact on their day. They can get in and out. It'll be super easy. Now, for this first shot with our stand-ins, you can see everything's a little bit dull. I do want to add a little bit of snap and zing to this. This is going to be a pretty easy decision for me. There's a window right here, kind of casting some soft light on the foreground of the scene. All I'm going to do is I'm going to replicate that. Again, I don't want to fight the natural light. I'm going to add an umbrella over there, which is just going to send some clean, snappy light onto our models. It's going to give them a little bit of color, a little bit of detail. Pretty simple lighting, don't need to go crazy. To match the rest of our lighting, I'm going to also put a 1/4 CTO on that to make everything consistent. So now you can see we've got pretty good lighting on our stand-ins. We can easily throw our models in there and get them in and out in a couple minutes. So posing the models wasn't too difficult or complicated. I wanted it to feel natural. I told them to act like they were just checking in at the hotel, they had their luggage, and I had the check-in employee hand them a room key a few times back and forth just to get the feel of how things would go. It's pretty straightforward. I didn't need to go nuts. I just wanted to fill up that part of the scene and bring a little bit of interest to that check-in desk, which is pretty empty without any people there. So we are almost done with this shot. I've got all my people, all my lighting. It was pretty simple from a lighting standpoint. The only complicated thing was making sure that there were no people in the shot that we didn't explicitly want there. So take your time, have some patience. This might take an hour or two before you get every part of your scene with no people in it. So we're almost done, and there's one more trick that I want to show you for this shot. If you'll see in the background, there's a few pillars obstructing that ocean view. I want to drive home the point that this hotel is right on the ocean and that you can see it very clearly from the check-in. So what I'm going to do is show you a method to easily remove those pillars in post, something that would be impossible to just clone out. So what we're going to do is we're going to take my B camera, we're going to go over to another spot in the lobby where there's a clear view of that ocean, take a picture, and then in Photoshop, skew it in and hide those pillars. Now, some people may question the ethics of this, but you have to keep in mind how this picture is being used. If this were a real estate photo, for example, I don't think that kind of thing would fly. But since this is a hotel and it's an advertising usage, and because when you do walk in, you do get a bright, clear view of that ocean, I really have no problem pulling out a couple pillars to clean up this shot. Now, if you remember when we were shooting the room, I wouldn't want to add or remove something that the customer would expect to be in the room. But for this shot, it's not really something that someone's going to complain about on TripAdvisor or Yelp or whatever, but this is something that is clearly, again, clearly visible from different spots in the lobby. I just want to remove some of those pillars in this one spot and unobstruct the view. Now that we have all these pieces, let's go into Photoshop and put it together. So that was total chaos, right? We got people coming in and out, walking through the scene constantly. You have people trying to work, people trying to check in, people dragging luggage around. And as you just saw, it was quite a challenge to get all the pieces that we needed to make this final shot. But I'm really excited to edit. This one's gonna show some new techniques that's gonna really push what you can do with a photograph to make it look its absolute best. So let's jump in here to Lightroom, and as usual, I'm gonna do a cull. I've gone ahead and basically culled according to all my little flash pops into the ceiling. I want to light the floor nice and evenly, and the ambient frame, like I'm just looking at this, of course the ambient, as usual, is a total mess. And if you look at the ambient, like the color's kind of all over the place, there's highlights, there's weird reflections and everything, and using our flash will certainly clean that up and make this look like a much more professional, polished image. So I've gone ahead and culled my flash shots. What I've done here is I've just tried to make sure that for each flash pop, I'm getting something out of it, so to say. So what I'm looking for is, I want to make sure I have like a clean area of floor with no reflections of humans in them. Me and my assistant make sure we're hidden. And I want to make sure that I get a nice wide coverage. One of the problems that I think I'm going to run into here is that there's so many reflections, I'm going to catch myself on the floor. So I want to make sure the ones that I cull from that mirrored surface of a floor does not show us while we're lighting. So here's a look at what I've culled, and I've got a couple ambient frames here. I've got a darker ambient, a brighter ambient, and again, those are just frames with no lights, no nothing, that we're going to use to sort of cheat and blend everything together to keep it feeling natural. And then I've got 5 or 6 flash frames where I've covered a great deal of floor, tried to remove the reflections, and made sure that we're not in every single flash highlight. In addition to that, I have some frames with our people that we're going to composite in. And finally, I have a couple shots that I took off of the opposite balcony, which is basically somewhere out here, looking towards the ocean, that we're going to use to remove these big giant pillars and replace our view and get a really spectacular ocean view and really take this shot up a notch from just kind of a bland, somewhat dated hotel interior to something that really looks kick-ass. So let's take these photos. And I've done some general Lightroom adjustments, nothing crazy, brought the highlights down, brought the shadows up. For all of these, I'm going to take them, we're going to export these to JPEG and jump right into Photoshop. So in Photoshop, let's go to File, Scripts, Load Files into Stack, browse to this lesson folder, and we're going to open up 11 files for this one. And what we should be greeted with is something like this. Let's go ahead and turn off all the layers that we're not going to use. And we'll start with our 2 ambient layers. What I'm going to start with is number 11, that is that dark ambient exposure, because again, I want to build those brighter flash pops on top of that. And I'm just going to start on number 9 here, and I'm going to go to add a new layer mask, Alt-click, fill it with black, take my brush, set the blend mode to lighten. And I'm just going to paint in some of that brighter sitting area. I'm going to paint it out over those bushes back there. So something like that. And then we'll go to number 8. Sort of that transitional floor area there. Same story, set the blend mode to lighten. And using a big soft brush, paint in some of that floor. Of course, be careful to miss Adam's converse over there. Next up, we have layer number 7. And number 6, Alt-click, add a black layer mask, set the blend mode to lighten, take your brush, paint it in. This one I might want to change the blend mode to normal on. Let's see. Or do I want to leave it in lighten? Yeah, there's a little funky transition down here in lighten blend mode, so I'm going to leave that in normal. And just be a little carefuler with my blend. Something like that. I'll go to number 5. We'll try lighten again. And just make that transition nice and smooth. Obviously, I don't want to paint in any of that reflection, so I'm just going to use this to kind of blend in that floor area, make it feel nice and natural. Let's try number 4. That's really going to be the foreground here. I don't need a ton of opacity. I don't want to make it too bright. Make those chairs look real nice. I'll try lighten blend mode here, see what that changes. Yeah, that's nice. That kind of makes sure that I don't pick up Adam's feet, which is nice. Right there. Just a little bit. Make sure we don't get any of that cable. And we'll go a little brighter in the foreground here. Get some of those chairs and that flower up the wall. Cool. Okay, so we have this nice sort of even light on the floor. And if I look at layer 3 here, there's our people. Cool. So I'm going to group all of these together and name it lighting. And you can turn that on and off. And you can see, obviously, the floor looks much better, a bit cleaner, more white, more inviting, of course, compared to this darker, sort of messy reflection floor here. And the next move is going to be to blend together our base exposure with our flash. I sort of want to brighten up some of this so that the brightness of the floor better matches the brightness of that interior. So on that brighter ambient layer, I'm just going to brush in some of that higher exposure so things, again, feel more natural and less flashy. So something like that. There's a nice sort of blend between the flash on the floor and a nice bright natural ceiling. Okay. So next up, we're going to go ahead and blend our people in. So in order to blend in these people, I'm going to grab the pen tool, and I'm basically going to blend in this whole right-hand side and sort of softly transition from right to left. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the pen tool, and I'm going to come down here. Maybe make sure we keep all that stone in our selection so I don't have to deal with the color cast on that later. And just pen tool around this wall. We'll go down around our model's shirt here. And you don't need to be super precise, but you should be fairly accurate. I am going to feather this in so the blend doesn't have to be exactly perfect for every pixel. Something like that. And then I'll go up her hand here. With her hair, you don't have to be perfect and get every strand. We're going to be kind of rough in there, because I know we'll take a brush and blend that in softly later. We'll we'll go right down around the luggage. And somewhere around there, I'll start going wide with it again. And go all the way up this side. Again, I want to grab all three of those people at once. Maybe we'll come down here. All right, so there's our path. Let's go ahead and hit Command Enter or Control Enter and activate our selection. I'm going to go Shift F6, feather that all by 1 pixel, and I'm just going to add a layer mask to that. And what's going to happen is you'll see our people get dropped right in. All right, now if I zoom in here, it looks like the camera got bumped or something. You can see the pixels don't align perfectly. So in order to fix that, I'm going to change the blend mode of this people layer here to difference, which is going to allow me to line these layers up seamlessly. Now, if I take my move tool and just nudge those layers with my arrows, I'll know that it's perfectly lined up when everything is completely blacked out. If it's even a little bit off, you get this weird kind of opposite effect. But when things are lined up, you can nudge them right in and everything fades to black. So now I can set that blend mode back to normal. And if I zoom in and turn these layers on and off, you can see it's basically perfectly lined up. And now what I'm going to do is kind of refine this mask. Like you can see down here, that ambient light meets the flash, and it's a little bit harsh. So I'm just going to select the mask, take a brush, and don't even have to say it. Soft brush, maybe 30% opacity, and just start blending those together seamlessly. Something like that. Okay, so behind her luggage here is flashed area that I do want to reveal in this mask. So I'm just going to cut out this little loop down here around her hand. All right, once that's good, Command Enter, Shift F6, take our brush, and we're just going to hide some of that so that our composited people blend seamlessly into the scene. So we're moving along nicely here, and the next step is to take care of some of these color casts and start to mitigate the ugly greenish reddish hues that appear throughout. So what I'm going to do in order to fix that is I'm going to take my pen tool, and basically all of this ceiling we're going to select around, and I'm even going to come down the pillars a little bit, just like I did in the hotel room, just so we get a nice blend from about halfway down to all the way up to the ceiling. And we're going to suck out some of that ugly greenish red from these walls and just clean the picture up, give it kind of a squeaky clean feel. Again, I don't want to completely suck out all the warmth because we do have these nice tungsten lights, and I do like some warmth in my shots in general. So I'm going to leave the floor kind of untouched. Obviously, want to leave the woods untouched. But the pillars, the ceiling, all that can be selected. And we're just going to suck out some of those funky colors. Like, look at this. There's like a yellow to a red to a green to a purple. It's all over the place. Light comes in from this window, hits these chairs, bounces up, hits the floor, bounces up. We want to clean that up. I'll make sure to get over here as well. All right, We'll hit Command Enter, Shift F6 to sort of soften that. And I'm going to make a new hue and saturation adjustment layer. I'm going to name this ceiling. And you guessed it, I'm going to grab my hand tool and just suck out some of those ugly greens and suck out those ugly reds as well. Now you can see I start to get this like weird whitish ceiling and this warm lower interior. So on this mask where I have these hard edges where those pillars come down from the ceiling, I'm going to take my brush and I'm just going to softly blend that together. Make things feel a bit more believable in terms of that transition from warmth to whiteness. Now that's looking better, but I feel like the ceiling is a bit too dark. So I'm going to reactivate that mask by command clicking on the hue and saturation adjustment, add a new layer, name it ceiling brightness. And this is a curves adjustment layer. And I'm just going to pump that ceiling up a little bit until we have a more of a bright, clean, high key look going here. And right above the camera, I'm going to brush out that mask. I feel like that's too bright. Make this nice and even. There we go. There's like a little line over here. Let's go ahead and knock that out. All right, now I'm going to adjust the opacity of these layers until I get a more natural feel. There we go. That was about 60, 70% opacity. And the curves I'm happy with. That's looking pretty nice. So you successfully sucked some of that color out. And I feel like the foreground could use a little bit as well. So I'm going to make another adjustment layer, hue and saturation, and just globally kind of suck out some of the yellows in here, but not all the way. Something like that. And I'm going to brush this out over the wood and the chairs and this guy's shirt. Make sure my areas that should stay warm are warm, and the areas that I want to be nice and bright stay nice and bright. So we're moving through this image here, and I think it's time to take care of these insanely blown out windows. And what I want to do, I really want to bring that outside view in. When you walk into this hotel, you're just hit with this ocean breeze, and when you walk in the front doors, you can actually see the ocean's horizon all around you. But from the view in this lobby, I'm kind of tucked back in a corner here. You don't really get that. So I want to kind of replicate that feeling of that view. And what we're going to do, we're going to take all these pillars out. We're going to take these guys out over here as well, and this guy, and we're really going to make that ocean view feel a bit larger than life. So this might be a little complicated to follow at first, but what I did was, like I said, I walked over here and I took a few shots of just the horizon. And I'm just going to drop that in. I made sure to keep the perspective somewhat similar and the horizon in the same spot. I'll be able to replace those views, get rid of those pillars, and make this feel a bit better in terms of not really feeling like you're hemmed in by these pillars everywhere, but trying to open up the view, make it feel a little bit more airy in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a pen tool, and along these lines here, we're just going to trace out the window view, going right in around this plant. After I've got my selection here, I'm going to make a new group and call it window replacement. I'm going to hit Command Enter, and I'm going to start sort of applying these selections to that group. Now I've got this big window here. I know I'm going to want to replace all of these pieces right here. So we'll trace around that window, around all this furniture. And lastly, I know we're going to want to take care of this over here. So the same thing, follow that roof line. And I'm going to go, let's say, right down this railing and open all that up to the outside. So I'll go ahead and Command Enter that. Activate your selection on the group. And you can hit delete, or you can paint in some white there, whatever you're most comfortable with to change your mask there. And we can fill that out all the way, Alt-click, hit backslash and view your selection overlaid on the image. Excellent, all right. Once we have our selection all set and our mask in place, go ahead and hit Command D or Control D to deselect and turn on, we'll bring both of these in here, turn on layer number 2. And what you see is that horizon out the window. And you can drag this around. And what I want you to do is we're going to build a scene out there. So let's put this at 50% opacity. And we'll look and see where the original horizon is. It looks like it's right there. And I'll go back to 100% opacity, and you can turn that on and off, and you can barely make out the horizon. We're going to line up those two horizons. And what we're going to do is we're going to take number 1 here, do the same thing. I'll drag it over, line up those horizons. Add a mask, I'll paint it out, preserve our original view out there, and our nice palm tree. And I'm going to duplicate number 1 here. I'm going to move that over a little more, get me some nice blue ocean out there, and just continue hiding that excess. All right. So now this still looks super fake, but we're going to make it look perfect in a minute. All right, now that we have most of our window replaced, we've got to go ahead and take care of this railing. Obviously, this does not match with the scene behind it. So this should be relatively quick and painless. I'm going to just pen tool around all those railings right there and the desk. And I'm going to go all around the edge of these objects. Make sure to come down here. And I'm going to hit Command Enter. And on that window replacement mask here, on the group itself, I'm going to take a white brush and paint in all of that mask, making sure to reveal it. We'll get rid of anything else that's in the way down here. Excellent. All right, and now what I'm going to do is, again, on this mask, if you turn the group off, you can see where those layers are. So what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and turn off the layers underneath the mask. And I'll hit backslash so I can actually see what I'm doing. And just using a little brush, I'm just going to shift click along each railing here to paint those out. And now we're in business. This might take a minute or two, but we're going to get a nice mask from all those little railings. All right, we've got our mask completed. Let's go ahead and turn all those layers back on. And now you can see With some exception, we have successfully replaced the view through the railing. I'm going to come over here and do the same thing. It looks like there was a little bit of plant action down here. I'll take a brush, and I'm just going to start with the black brush painting back in some of those plants. And I'm going to bring the ocean down. So it just goes around the edges of those plants. I'll make the brush nice and soft, sort of cover our tracks in between. And we're going to make this blend a bit more seamless in just a minute. We'll bring some ocean in here. Now you'll notice the original exterior is way brighter than the interior. So what we're going to have to do to make this realistic is brighten that exterior. And I think you guys already know what I'm going to do. I'm going to add a curves layer in here. And we're going to just bump up that entire exterior so that it looks brighter out there than it is inside. Now obviously I just killed our nice blue sky, so I'm going to take a big soft brush and I'm going to paint out that curves adjustment so we get some of that sky back. We just get a little bit of color out there. Something like that. All right, now our transition is looking a bit better, especially down in those bright areas. Something like that will do. We can come in here and further refine this mask. Just using the brush to make it perfect. There we go. This is 100%. So we'll zoom in here, and I'm going to gently sort of brush in some more ocean in these reflections. Again, to kind of tame this. Make it feel more natural. Better sell that compositing. All right, so our window's looking decent. I'm going to make a new layer on top of that, and there's a few things I want to clean up. Like this railing, for instance, looks a little fuzzy. Let's knock some of that out. I'm just going to take a brush, sample that railing color, and that like 30% opacity. Just sort of get rid of some of that halo-y fuzziness. And you can do the same thing for a bunch of these railings as well. All right, so the windows look good. It still looks fake because I haven't taken care of the ceiling. And just like you've seen me do many times before, I'm going to pen tool this entire ceiling. For every sort of window that I replace the sky in. Once I have that selection from the pen tool, I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to call it Ceiling Fix. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this brush, grab your brush, and I want you to sample some of these colors And I'm going to slowly start kind of sampling, painting, sampling, painting, sampling, painting, to sort of match that gradient in the ceiling. And I'm just painting out those pillars piece by piece until they're entirely gone. I'm going to do the same thing over here. Sample, paint, sample, paint, sample, and paint until they're totally hidden. And lastly, all the way down here, sample and paint, sample and paint, sample and paint. Try to keep that nice natural gradient from foreground to background. All right, once you've got that, take this whole ceiling fix layer and go to Filter, Add Noise, add like 2 pixels, 2% worth of noise. And I'm going to add a curves layer to this ceiling fix layer. And I'm sort of going to darken it a little bit. Just take my brush, and I'm just improvising here. Sort of paint back in some of those natural shadows to give that a more of a three-dimensional feel here. Now the hue and saturation are a little funky, so I'll edit the hue and the saturation here to kind of bring them all in line. Just desaturate it a bit. There we go. That actually looks shockingly good. And when viewed as a whole, you would have no idea that I just replaced all of that. So let's go ahead and group all those together, and we'll call that touch-ups. And we'll group that with the window replacement group and turn that on and off. And we totally just replaced that view with something much more agreeable. I think it could use a little more brightness still. To make it feel a bit more natural. There we go. So there we have our windows fixed. I'm going to just take care of this little thing up here. I'm going to go in my touch-ups folder, make a quick selection. Clone out the remnants of that pole so it looks like it ends where it's supposed to end. And I'll sort of blend this in so it's feathered and the whole thing feels a bit more natural. It's just one big improvisational exercise here. Just kind of feathering that edge, make it feel less sharp and jaggy. There we go. So just to finish up these windows out here, I'm going to bring a ruler down. I'm going to make sure that horizon is perfectly even all the way across the frame. So each of these window layers I can just sort of nudge into place. Until that horizon is nice and lined up. And that will at last conclude that window replacement. which is a nice improvement for the shot. Now all the stuff should just clone out any of those little security cameras, lights, that sort of thing. So I'm going to Command-Alt-Shift-E, copy all to a new layer. And in order to use my Content Aware tool, which this image is a perfect candidate for, I've got to, again, flatten everything to a new layer so Photoshop can get all that data from one layer. So I'll just make a marquee around all these little lights. Shift F5, Content Aware Fill, and super easily take care of that. This tool works really, really well when you have these simple to clone objects in this field of sort of empty ceiling. Now I could try to clone these, but I feel like it would be a nightmare. And like I said, Photoshop is really good at little things like this. So I'm not going to get super involved with my clone stamp. All right, the last thing I want to take care of is all these burnt out light bulbs. So in order to do that, I'm going to make a new layer, call it light bulbs. And I'm just going to grab the pen tool, and I'm going to trace out the edge of these cans here. Hit Command-Enter, Shift-F6, and I'm going to grab my gradient tool and pick a nice warm orange and drag that gradient from left to right. I'm trying to approximate the gradient in this real light here. Something like that. And let's put the opacity at like 90% so you can see some of the detail in there. I'm going to do the same thing on all these lights down here. Okay, that's looking really, really good. And there's a few more things I could clone out, and you can do this like if you want to really take this and make it perfect. All these little holes in the ceiling here. You could create a new frequency separation layer and make it absolutely flawless. But for this lesson, I think you guys get the point. Again, I can group all these together and show you exactly how far we've come. The difference is kind of astounding. I'm going to Command-Alt-Shift-E and flatten all to a new layer. The last thing I'm going to do is drag out some ruler lines and make sure everything is nice and vertical and everything is also nice and horizontal, because again, this is a 1-point perspective. And I've noticed that because we were using the 1.4 extender on this shot, there might be a little bit of barrel distortion in there, so I'm going to filter and add a little bit of lens correction. Probably I like to go to just 1 or 1.5. It's usually enough to straighten out those edges. And I'm going to go ahead and skew this to make sure those verticals are nice and straight. Same on the right-hand side over here. All right, that's looking pretty good. I'm going to hit Enter and confirm those changes. And again, going to go ahead and save this as our final lobby and do some quick edits in Lightroom, but for the most part, this is pretty much done. So this shot obviously had a lot of work put into it between the models and the staging and moving everything around and even replacing that window. And this is definitely a more illustrative kind of approach. And I wouldn't really want to do this for something like an architectural shoot where we're supposed to be a bit more truthful and faithful to what is actually in front of the camera. But for an advertising usage, where we're trying to communicate clearly and simply a product which is being advertised, for example, a hotel near the ocean, I don't have so much of a problem with sort of embellishing the truth. I don't feel like this is a dishonest image by any means. I feel like this is, again, it's showing the viewer how close the hotel really is to the ocean. It's more in line with the feel that you have when you're in the space. When you're using a wide-angle lens, we tend to diminish that view out the window. If you were to turn around, this is very similar to what you would see. You could walk down those steps and your toes would literally be in the sand right then and there. So you can use your judgment on this, but for the most part, I think this is a fairly real and much cleaner, more simple representation of the product that we're trying to sell here. So use your judgment, use those tools to improvise and change things as you would. On the whole, I'm really happy with this picture. There's a couple things I might change, like the wardrobe and the luggage, but we just, like I said, we grabbed those guys out of a real estate office. They were really quick stand-ins just to show you guys the concept of compositing in people on a complicated shot like this. So with all that being said, let's go on to our next shot.